I'm Damon Wilson, President and CEO of the National Endowment Democracy, and I'm joined today by Evgenia Kara-Murza. Welcome. It's good to be with you, Evgenia. We're here to talk about her husband, Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was arrested April in Moscow and is detained right now. Vladimir Kara-Murza is a Russian opposition leader, a journalist, an author, an extraordinary filmmaker. He was a protege of Boris Nemtsov. He was poisoned in 2015 and poisoned again in 2017, going into comas, followed by FSB agents, presumably those that also poisoned Alexander Navalny. But Vladimir is also a father, and he's also a husband. We're here with Vladimir's wife. Thank you for coming in to talk to us today. I just wanted to start and ask, why did Vladimir decide to go back to Russia? I last spoke to him on April 5th, the day before he went back, and days later arrested. Why was he determined to return to Moscow?
Well, he never decided not to go. He kept going back because this is his country. He's a Russian politician. And he never, when we talk about Vladimir, he never wanted to become this human rights fighter in the pure sense of its word. He never meant to become a revolutionary and spend his productive years on the barricades or in prison. What he wanted after he finished his studies at Cambridge, packed his suitcase and went back to Russia, he wanted to run for the State Duma. He wanted to become a legislator and make laws to make his country better for everyone living in it. This is what he wanted. But we ended up with 22 years of Putin's regime. And because Vladimir is a very honest and decent person, he cannot keep silent. He cannot stay silent in the face of what's happening in Russia and now in Ukraine. Because Mr. Putin has been using repressions against his own people for over 2 decades. And now he decided to become bolder and invade the territory of the sovereign state of Ukraine. So, bullies, and Mr. Putin is a bully, they get emboldened by silence, by people not reacting to their crimes. Even when we talk about this war in Ukraine, it didn't start in late February. It began in 2014 when he invaded Crimea. He invaded Crimea, well, and people just, said, this is not a good thing you did there. Of course, many Western countries, all developed democracies, Western democracy, did not recognize Crimea as Russian territory. But there was nothing more. No serious sanctions, no repercussions. So a few years later, Putin decided that he can get more and grab more. Well, Vladimir is someone who cannot stay silent in the face of something so atrocious. And he's been in the opposition to the Putin regime since Mr. Putin came to power. Vladimir has been advocating for the introduction of personal targeted sanctions against criminals in the Putin regime for over 10 years. In 2015, his colleague and friend, Boris Nemtsov, paid the ultimate price for this advocacy because he was the one who first suggested this idea to Vladimir. Boris Nemtsov was killed on the Bolshoi-Moskvoretsky Bridge in Moscow. He was shot. 2 months later, my husband was poisoned for the first time. That's right. Vladimir got better. He learned how to walk again, how to hold a spoon. He took his cane and he went back to Moscow. And then in 2017, another poisoning happened. And he did the same thing. He learned how to walk. He learned how to hold a spoon. and he went back to continue his work. He was now, he continued advocating for the introduction of personal sanctions. Now with his friend and colleague William Browder, they traveled the world, and their advocacy has shown amazing results because so many countries all around the world have actually adopted these Magnitsky sanctions. And I believe that when the war had broken out, it was rather easy to implement these targeted sanctions for Western countries because the legislation was already in place. And it took over 10 years of very hard work of trying to convince Western countries that these sanctions were crucial to bring to responsibility those involved in human rights violations in Russia and all over the world.
You said it yourself that Vladimir, your husband, he's not silent. He is outspoken indeed. But why? What makes him tick? Why do you think he has been so bold, so courageous? Help us understand what has driven him.
He believes that as a Russian politician, he needs to be where people are fighting this regime. And he also believes that everyone brave enough to stand up to this regime should show others not to be afraid. And Vladimir is not the only brave person in Russia. You know, over 15,000 arrests have been made since the beginning of the war. Those are people who went in the streets to protest against Putin's invasion of Ukraine. They went out in the streets armed only with truth and human dignity. They had no protection whatsoever, and they knew, going out in the streets, they knew that they would probably get detained, beaten up, arrested, thrown in jail, tortured, humiliated. The list is long. Over 15,000 people went out to protest, and hundreds of them are now serving unlawful jail sentences in detention centers all across Russia. And this shows that despite these opinion polls that are offered to the Western world, and that show that over 80% of the Russian population supports this war, no, the Russian people does not want this war. It does not support this war. There are people who go out to protest despite all odds, facing terrible risks to their lives, to their safety, facing 15 years in jail for speaking out. And this is the same article my husband was recently charged under. It's called Dissemination of Knowingly False Information, as the Russian government calls it, about the use of the Russian armed forces in Ukraine. So basically for speaking the truth, for telling people how many civilian casualties there are, for telling people about mass murders, mass rapes that happen in Ukraine and have been happening for the last 2 months. This is terrible. And people don't want any part in this, and they go out and they protest and they get detained and they get beaten up and thrown in jail.
Tell me, if we could speak with Vladimir right now, what message do you think he would want to share about the Russian people? What would his message be to us, to our viewers, about the Russian people at this moment?
The first message is not to be afraid to speak up when an injustice is happening in front of you. And the second thing is that the Russian people doesn't want this. Even if I'm sometimes asked about these videos that show Russians being stopped in the street and asked about the war, and they say, yes, I support President Putin. I think this is this special operation is designed to liberate Ukraine from Nazis and stuff like that. Let's not forget that Putin has managed to install an Iron Curtain in Russia in less than 2 months. The last independent media outlets were closed or forced to close, forced to suspend their operations at the beginning of the war. The last independent radio station, the Echo of Moscow Radio, where Vladimir had a weekly show, was closed at the beginning of the war. Novaya Gazeta, a popular Russian news outlet, was forced to suspend its publications and its activities. They went to this measure trying to protect their employees from persecutions. There was TV Dost that was forced to suspend its activities as well. This was not a TV station, a TV channel that you could see on TV, but it operated online. It was very popular. When we talk about television, the majority of the Russian population still relies on TV as the main source of information. And state propaganda machine has been working relentlessly for over 2 decades, silencing one opposition TV channel after another. So the majority of the Russian population that relies on TV have not had an independent TV channel at their disposal for years. So when they switch on their TVs, they hear this message about the West wanting Russia's demise, about the NATO wanting to see Russia on its knees, about Russia being surrounded by enemies. Well, they switch to another channel and they hear the exact same message, and again, and again, and again. So a big part of the Russian population is severely, very sadly and painfully brainwashed. Had these people, if these people knew what was actually happening in Ukraine, I don't believe they would be supporting this regime, and they would be supporting this so-called special operation. It is just unthinkable, because these people, they are shown images of people meeting Russian soldiers with flowers in the streets, in Ukrainian streets. They are shown pictures of Russian flags going up on administrative buildings in Ukraine, liberated from Nazis. Well, we have access to objective information. We understand that this is not the reality. This is a warped image that Vladimir Putin has been creating for over 2 decades for the Russian population. These brainwashed people in Russia who rely on TVs as the main source of information, they do not see the real image. And they have not seen the real image for a very long time.
Let me ask, have you been able to hear from your husband? Have you been able to communicate?
After his detention, there were a few days when I got daily phone calls from him. These were short phone calls, just 10-minute phone calls, but I was grateful for that. Since this criminal case has been initiated against him, that can send him to prison for up to 10 years, I have not been able to communicate directly with him. His phones have been confiscated by the FSB, and the only contact I've had with Vladimir since the criminal case was opened was through his lawyer.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about that. How do you see the next steps in his case, and how can his friends, his partners, his allies around the world be supportive? What's next?
Well, next, we're going to fight. We're going to fight them every step of the way. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that his case is as visible as possible, because this is the only protection that he has nowadays, being behind bars in a Russian prison. And I will keep talking about the ever-growing problem with political prisoners in Russia. Their number is growing by the day, and I will keep I will just basically continue Vladimir's work because I know that this is important to him, and I will fight for his release, and I will continue his work, and I will be as loud as I can about what's happening in Russia, and I will try to convince the West that the Russian people should not be hated for this war in Ukraine, because we don't want this. I'm Russian, I don't want this. My husband is Russian, he doesn't want this. These 15,000 people who went out in the streets to protest, they do not want this. Many Russians who were forced to leave Russia because they fear persecutions, they fear for their lives, they fear for the lives of their children. They had to leave the country, and they continue helping refugees from outside of Russia. They do not want this war. And we will continue fighting this regime for as long as it takes. And Vladimir will be free.
I'll tell you, when I last saw him in person in Washington, he shared that he was committed to going back to Moscow. He shared that he saw it as a selfish act, and that if he didn't go back to speak out, he couldn't have a clean conscience of knowing that he was doing what was right. And I talked to him again the day before he flew back, and he underscored that every voice of opposition was precious, and it just mattered to show, whether it was in 1968, whether it was 7 protesters on Red Square, or the 15,000 people in prison today, that if you speak out, Vladimir Putin can't speak for Russia.
Absolutely.
And it really gave me goosebumps. We thank you for your grace, for your courage, your determination. We want to be supportive, follow his case, and thank you for sharing a little bit with us and with our audience today, Evgenia. It's really an honor to have you.
Thank you, Damon.
Thank you.